picture this. It's 4:30 in the morning.
Oh, the absolute worst time to be awake.
Right. And a transit bus driver is standing in the bleak fluorescent lit break room of a municipal depot.
Yeah, totally grim atmosphere.
He's been driving for this city for 20 years. He's got a mortgage, he's got a kid in college, and he's like 2 years away from his pension.
So the stakes are incredibly high for him.
Exactly. And last night he felt a nasty cold coming on, so he chugged some over-the-counter nighttime cold medicine and went to bed.
Which is a super normal thing to do.
Totally normal. But now he's staring at the mandatory pre-shift breathalyzer and, the biometric scanner.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. He realizes with this sudden icy drop in his stomach that he is still incredibly groggy.
The medicine hasn't worn off yet.
Exactly. His reaction times are totally shot. He is in no condition to maneuver a 15-ton vehicle through rush hour traffic.
It is the ultimate psychological trap. Because now he has to make a choice.
Right. And the choice seems obvious to anyone sitting at home, right? You just go to the dispatcher and say, hey, I messed up. I took heavy medication. I can't drive today.
But in reality, in the compliance framework of most modern corporations, making that admission is a career death sentence.
Yeah, that means immediate suspension.
It means an investigation. It might mean losing that pension entirely.
So what does he do? He looks at the keys, he looks at the dispatcher's office, and that biological instinct for self-preservation just kicks in.
He gambles.
He gambles. He decides to stay quiet, get behind the wheel, and just pray he doesn't kill anyone.
Which is terrifying, but honestly entirely predictable.
Yeah.
When a system demands martyrdom for an honest mistake, you don't get martyrs, you get cover-ups.
Welcome, everyone. If you are joining us right now, it means you are insanely curious.
You're our kind of people.
Exactly. You're the kind of person who wants a deep, organized exploration of complex ideas, but without, that crushing feeling of information overload.
No textbooks today.
Right. We are bypassing the textbook definitions today to look at the messy reality of human nature. Our mission for today's deep dive is to unpack a really fascinating stack of essays from an incredibly observant author.
Someone who spent years analyzing exactly this kind of behavioral trap.
Yes. We are decoding a deeply counterintuitive approach to human error, corporate compliance, and honestly, how we handle our own everyday imperfections.
And this author is uniquely positioned for this exploration because they approach the whole concept of human error through a completely different lens.
Oh, so.
Well, they do not view mistakes as ethical failings. They don't look at that bus driver and see a bad person.
Right.
They view mistakes as a matter of probability and physics. It's an inevitability. If you put human beings in complex systems, errors will occur.
Just mathematically.
Mathematically, yes. The author argues that our entire societal framework for dealing with these errors is fundamentally backwards because it completely ignores the actual psychology of the person who just made the mistake.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the central paradox we are circling today, and I want you, the listener, to really hold on to this question as we go, is this.
Let's hear it.
Why is it that when companies create stricter rules, zero tolerance policies and harsher punishments to prevent scandals, they actually end up causing more severe, more dangerous cover-ups?
To understand that paradox, we really have to look closely at what we'll call the standard corporate playbook.
The default response.
Yeah, whenever a scandal, a major error, or a safety violation occurs, almost every institution, whether it's a bank, an airline, or a hospital, falls back on the exact same 4-step response.
Okay, walk me through the steps.
Step 1, stop the bleeding, contain the immediate damage, whatever that is.
Makes sense. Put out the fire.
Right. Step 2, investigate the cause. Find out what went wrong, trace the emails, review the footage, and figure out exactly who was responsible.
Find the bad guy.
Find the bad guy, yeah. Step 3, formulate preventative measures. This usually means drafting a massive new set of procedures to ensure this exact specific thing never happens again.
More rules.
Always more rules. And step 4, implement those measures across the board, usually with mandatory training modules and digital sign-offs.
Now, I have to be honest, on paper, that sounds entirely logical.
It does.
Like if I'm a shareholder or if I'm the government regulating an industry, that is exactly what I want to see a responsible company doing. It feels decisive.
It feels incredibly decisive, and it is entirely comforting to management. It creates this wonderful illusion of control.
The illusion.
Yeah, the illusion. Because in reality, on the ground level, this standard playbook fails to stop recurrences time and time again.
Right. You see the same scandals popping up in the same industries every few years.
Exactly. The author points out that the failure of this entire model begins with a semantic problem, the ambiguity of the word mistake.
Right, because mistake is a massive umbrella term.
It really is. There is a fundamental difference between an intentional, malicious act of fraud, someone actively trying to embezzle funds, or actively trying to sabotage a machine.
Like actual villain behavior.
Right, versus an honest human error that spirals out of control because of bad timing, bad information, or just pure fatigue.
So maliciously deleting financial records to hide theft versus accidentally clicking reply all with a sensitive document.
Precisely. Both are categorized as mistakes or breaches, but the intent is worlds apart.
But corporations often apply a bizarre double standard, don't they?
They do. The company line, the PR statement, is always to err is human, everyone makes mistakes.
They might even have it on motivational posters in the break room.
Yeah, the nice sunset posters. But when the indirect departments, meaning the administrative, legal, and compliance teams, sit down to design the actual regulatory systems and the penalty matrices, they completely fail to account for the psychology of the person who just made that innocent error.
Let's talk about that psychology. If I make a massive error at work, even an honest one, my immediate psychological state isn't, to err is human, I shall now report this for the betterment of the company.
Definitely not.
My immediate state is absolute physiological panic. My heart rate spikes, my cortisol levels flood my brain, and I enter a literal fight or flight state.
And that is the crucial biological reality that compliance departments ignore. If a system does not account for the psychological drive to escape harsh punishment, that system is absolutely doomed to fail.
So it's basically fighting human biology.
Completely. Let's go back to an honest mistake. A worker turns the wrong valve or enters the wrong data.
Okay.
If they know that confessing to this mistake will result in them being fired, publicly shamed, losing their professional license, or ruining their family's financial stability.
The psychological drive for self-preservation overrides everything else.
Everything. The stricter the countermeasure, the more draconian and severe the punishment, the stronger the psychological drive to cover up an innocent mistake becomes.
Okay, I hear that, but I have to play devil's advocate here. I'm going to push back a little.
Go for it.
Because if someone breaks the rules, even accidentally, shouldn't there be severe consequences to deter them and others? I mean, think about it like parenting. It's a smaller scale, but the psychology should be similar, right?
Okay, let's hear the analogy.
If my kid is tossing a baseball in the living room and accidentally shatters an expensive vase,
Oh, classic.
right, and they know for a fact they'll be grounded for a month with 0 screen time if they confess, my logic as a parent is that the harsh punishment will make them more careful.
But does it? Let's analyze your vase scenario because it perfectly illustrates the author's main point.
Okay.
Did the threat of being grounded for a month actually deter the kid from throwing the ball in the living room?
Well, no, because kids are impulsive.
Exactly. The harsh consequence didn't deter the initial accident. You cannot deter an accident by definition because an accident is unintentional.
Wait, that's actually really profound. You can't deter an accident.
You can't. The threat of punishment only deterred the confession.
Oh, wow.
When your kid breaks that vase, their brain calculates the risk. They think, if I tell my parent, I lose everything for a month. If I hide the pieces under the rug and blame the dog, I might get away with it.
I think just go into survival mode.
Exactly. When you punish the outcome of an innocent mistake as if it were a malicious act of defiance, you guarantee a cover-up.
Wow. Okay, so I haven't taught them to be careful. I've just trained them to be a better liar.
Yes.
I've taught them how to manage my wrath rather than how to manage the living room safely.
That is a phenomenal way to phrase it. You've taught them to manage the wrath. And in a corporate setting, managing the wrath looks like falsified safety logs, hidden structural damage, and altered financial data.
Which is terrifying.
It is. The employees aren't trying to destroy the company. They're trying to survive the compliance department.
So if punishing the intent or assuming bad intent leads to the corporate equivalent of pieces of vase swept under the rug, what is the alternative?
Yeah, what's the fix?
Yeah, what should companies actually be focusing on if they want to build a system that works?
This leads us directly into the core philosophy of the author's work, which is a radical and frankly brilliant shift in perspective.
I'm ready.
The author explicitly states that the ultimate goal of compliance must absolutely not be about punishing the offender or asserting moral authority.
Okay, then what is it?
The primary overriding goal must be preventing the spread of the negative result to a third party.
The third party being the customer who buys the product, the passenger on the airplane, the public at large.
Yes. The priority is containment of harm, not retribution. If you don't build countermeasures that account for the rule breaker's psychological fear of punishment, the author says recurrences are guaranteed.
Because they'll just keep hiding it.
Exactly. Let's look at a specific, highly controversial example from the text that brings this into sharp focus. The author proposes a scenario regarding transportation workers, pilots, train engineers, bus drivers, and the mandatory breathalyzer test.
Oh, this is the mouthwash dilemma. I remember reading this in the source material and thinking it sounded absolutely crazy at first glance.
It does sound crazy until you break down the psychology. So, a worker blows into a breathalyzer before their shift, and it registers a positive result for alcohol.
Okay.
The immediate assumption and the standard corporate policy is that this person was drinking and is trying to work under the influence. It's an instant firing offense.
Sure, zero tolerance.
But what if the employee insists, I wasn't drinking beer, I just used a heavy alcohol-based mouthwash right before I walked in, or I ate a huge amount of fermented food?
My immediate instinct, and I think the instinct of 99% of managers, is to say, you're lying. That's the oldest excuse in the book. You're trying to dodge the consequences.
You immediately assume bad faith.
Yeah, exactly.
And that assumption is the exact trap we've been talking about. The company's immediate instinct is to turn the situation into an interrogation. Are you lying? Let's take a blood test. Let's review your history. Let's prove you drank.
It becomes an episode of Law and Order.
Right. They turn a safety protocol into a moral lie detector test. The focus shifts entirely to the character of the employee.
While the actual danger, putting a potentially impaired person behind the wheel, is almost secondary to the HR process of proving them guilty.
Precisely. The author argues that companies must prioritize what they term results responsibility.
Results responsiveness.
Yes. The result we want to avoid is an impaired driver crashing a bus into a third party. Therefore, if a worker fails a breathalyzer, the author argues that the immediate response should be entirely decoupled from moral judgment and career-ending punishment.
Decoupled how?
If you blow positive, whether it is from 6 pints of beer the night before or an over-enthusiastic swig of Listerine, the result is the same. You are immediately removed from duty for the day without facing a disciplinary tribunal or losing your job.
I am really struggling with this. I have to push back hard here.
I expected you would.
If I'm running a transit authority and I say, hey, everyone, if you blow positive, we'll just send you home with pay for the day and no questions asked, aren't I basically giving a green light to functional alcoholics?
It feels like that, yes.
Are people just going to abuse the system to get days off?
It is a totally valid concern, and it's why this idea is so radical. But let's look at the alternative. Let's look at the system we currently have.
Okay.
Under the strict zero tolerance system, what does the functional alcoholic do? Or what does the guy who honestly just used mouthwash do?
Well, the mouthwash guy panics because he thinks he's going to lose his pension over dental hygiene.
Right. And what do they both do? They figure out ways to cheat the breathalyzer. They find a buddy to blow into it for them. They find loopholes. They hide the reality. And eventually, someone gets behind the wheel when they really shouldn't, and people die.
The third party gets hurt.
Exactly. The author's point is that if you remove the sheer terror from the equation, you eliminate the incentive to cheat the safety mechanism.
So, by accepting that humans are flawed and maybe sometimes someone will abuse a lenient policy, you are ultimately creating a tighter net for the public.
Yes.
You are saying, I care more about the passengers on this bus than I care about punishing this specific driver today.
Exactly. You remove the emotion, you create a safe off-ramp. If the employee knows, they can say, hey, I think my mouthwash triggered this, I'm really sorry. And the manager just says, okay, protocol says you can't drive today. We're swapping you out for the backup driver. Go home and we'll see you tomorrow. Then that employee is never going to try to bypass the machine.
The public is protected.
The third party is protected. The negative result is contained. This is the absolute core of the author's compliance philosophy.
Now, obviously, if the same employee blows positive 3 times a week, you have a pattern, right?
Of course, you address it as a systemic issue at that point. But the immediate point of contact response must be about safety, not judgment.
You can investigate the why later.
Right. On a macro scale, but in the moment, the goal is purely physical safety.
It's like treating compliance like an engineering problem rather than a criminal justice problem.
I like that.
A safety net doesn't judge the acrobat who falls into it, it just stops them from hitting the concrete.
That is a beautiful way to synthesize it. And the failure to understand the insistence on treating compliance as a moral crusade doesn't just cause cover ups.
What else does it do?
It leads to a completely different, equally destructive corporate disease: the creation of utterly useless, bloated rules.
Yes. Let's get into this because this transition is fascinating.
Yeah.
You go from punishing intent to over engineering the workplace. The author calls this rule creep, right?
Rule creep, yes. It goes back to step 3 of that standard corporate playbook we discussed earlier: formulate preventative measure.
Right. The knee jerk reaction.
Exactly. When an error happens, the immediate reflex of the indirect administrative departments is to prove to management that they are doing something.
So they can justify their salaries.
Basically. And the easiest way to look busy and effective is to add a new rule.
So an employee accidentally approves an invoice for the wrong amount. Management panics. The new rule is every invoice now requires a double check by a peer and a final physical signature from a vice president.
Exactly. You add a double lock. You add a mandatory 15-point checklist. You add layers of friction. And this leads us to what the author observed and termed the 30% paradox.
Okay, walk me through this because the math on this is wild.
The author was consulting or observing a specific company, and they were analyzing a particular safety protocol. They discovered, through data analysis, that this specific safety rule was being actively violated by the operational frontline workers 30% of the time.
Almost a third of the time.
Yes. 1 out of every 3 times this task was performed, the workers completely ignored the mandatory safety check.
Okay, so if I'm the head of compliance and I see that a safety rule is being broken 30% of the time, I'm having a heart attack.
Oh, absolutely.
I am calling an all hands meeting. I'm threatening to fire people. I'm reporting the department to the federal regulators.
And that would be the standard indirect department response. But the author dug deeper. They looked at the outcome data.
And what do they find?
In the entirety of the time this rule had been ignored 30% of the time, across thousands of instances, absolutely 0 safety incidents, 0 accidents, and 0 negative consequences had occurred.
Wait, none.
None. The rule was being broken constantly, and nothing bad was happening.
Which raises an incredibly uncomfortable question for management.
It really does.
If a rule is broken 1/3 of the time with literally 0 negative impact on the real world, is the employee who broke the rule the problem? Or is the rule itself fundamentally flawed?
The author argues forcefully that it's the latter. The rule is the problem.
That's just red tape.
It is an administrative fantasy. It is a box to check that looks good in a binder, but has absolutely no correlation to the physical reality of the job.
So what's the solution?
The author's solution is something most corporate executives would find horrifying. If a rule is ignored safely 30% of the time, the best preventative measure isn't to enforce it harder.
Okay.
The best measure is to abolish the rule entirely.
Abolish it. Just scrap it.
Yep, scrap it.
I mean, I love the efficiency of that, but it sounds like we're just giving people a pass to be lazy. If workers complain that a rule is annoying, we just get rid of it. Where does it end?
It's not about being lazy, it's about recognizing alert fatigue and cognitive load. Think about your analogy earlier regarding software bloat.
Right, like when you buy a new computer and it runs beautifully.
Exactly.
But over the years, you add patches upon patches, updates upon updates, background security programs, until the operating system is so bogged down it takes 10 minutes just to open a web browser.
The system crashes under the weight of its own protective measures.
Right, it becomes unusable.
And human beings operate the exact same way.
Yeah.
If you give a frontline worker a checklist with 5 crucial life or death safety steps, they will follow them.
Because they make sense.
Right. But if you give them a checklist with 50 steps, where 45 of them are meaningless bureaucratic CYA, cover your assets, they will start skim reading.
They just pencil whip the forms.
Exactly. By forcing them to care about the meaningless rules, you dilute their attention and they eventually make a mistake on the rules that actually matter.
So the friction here is between the people who write the rules, who sit in an office and imagine how the work should be done perfectly, and the operational people who are actually on the factory floor or driving the buses, dealing with weather, delays, and broken equipment.
Yes. Administrative departments cannot just act as hall monitors looking over workers' shoulders. They have to understand the frontline reality. If you want workers to respect the safety culture has to respect their time and intelligence.
The author uses a really interesting analogy here from outside the corporate world. They bring in a concept from high stakes negotiations to explain how to manage this rule bloat. The Pekin rule, I think.
Yes, the pecan rule. It's a fascinating application of negotiation psychology to corporate compliance.
Walk me through it.
In a massive corporate merger or a hostage negotiation, a master negotiator knows that human memory is disproportionately judged by how an experience felt at its absolute peak and how it felt at the very end.
So it doesn't matter if the middle of the negotiation was smooth. If the end is a bitter screaming match, that's what both sides remember.
Right. So a smart negotiator will intentionally hold back a teeny, essentially meaningless concession, say 0.1% of a financial term, and purposefully concede it at the very end of the grueling process.
Why give up anything if you don't have to?
Because you don't fight to the bitter end over pennies just to prove you can win. You concede that final insignificant point because it makes the other party feel like they won a victory. It builds trust. They leave the table feeling respected and cooperative.
Oh, I see where this is going. The author is saying compliance departments need to act like master negotiators with their own employees.
Exactly. A smart compliance department knows which meaningless 30% paradox rules to strategically drop.
They give up the 0.1%.
Yes. If you go to the factory floor and say, "We hear you," this specific 15-step logging process is redundant and slows you down. We trust you, so we are abolishing that rule today. You have just conceded the 0.1%.
And what's the payout?
By dropping the bloated, useless rules, you gain a massive amount of goodwill and trust. The workforce realizes you aren't just bureaucrats, you actually understand their jobs.
And as a result, when you say, but these other three rules are absolutely non-negotiable, they believe you. They comply. You trade the illusion of total bureaucratic control for actual meaningful safety.
Precisely. You stop fighting human nature and you start working with it.
You know, this corporate illusion of control, this idea that we can perfectly manage human behavior with enough spreadsheets and flowcharts, reminds me of a totally different arena where people think they can outsmart probability and psychology.
Where is that?
The author actually pivots from the boardroom to a place that is essentially a monument to irrational human choices.
Ah, yes. The racetrack.
The racetrack. I love this section of the source material. The author shares this deeply personal story about being a lonely expat living in America in his late 20s.
Right, he was far from home.
Yeah. And the other expats he worked with all had wives and families, so when the weekend hit, they all went home. And he was left with these long, empty, isolating weekends.
Sounds pretty bleak.
It does. To kill time, a senior colleague eventually took him out to a local horse track. And he got completely hooked.
And not on the gambling itself.
Exactly. Not in the way you'd think. He wasn't addicted to the adrenaline of winning. He got addicted to the math and the psychology of the crowd.
He became like an anthropologist of the betting floor. He realized that a racetrack is basically a laboratory for flawed risk assessment. People are constantly making financial decisions based on deep emotional needs rather than cold logic.
The specific example he gives is the Exacta-Box versus Quinella dilemma. I had to read this part twice because the math of it is so counterintuitive, yet it perfectly explains human irrationality. Let's break this down for the listener.
Let's do it. It's a brilliant illustration. Suppose you are looking at a race and you want to bet that horse number 1 and horse number 2 are going to finish in the top 2 spots.
Okay, so I want them to be first and second in any order. I just want them to dominate the race.
Right. There's a bet called a quinella. A quinella ticket means exactly that. You win if horse 1 and 2 finish first and second, regardless of who is first and who is second. It's one single bet, one single ticket.
Simple enough.
But then there is an exacta bet. An exacta requires you to pick the exact order. You bet that horse 1 will be first and horse 2 will be second. If they flip-flop, you lose.
Okay, so much riskier.
Yes. Now, if you want to cover both outcomes with exacta bets, you buy what's called an exacta box. You buy one ticket for 1-2 and a second ticket for 2-1.
So essentially, an Exacta-Box, which is 2 tickets,
Yeah.
and a Quinella, which is 1 ticket, cover the exact same physical outcome in the real world. You win the bet if those 2 horses are the top 2.
Yes.
The actual probability of you walking away with money is mathematically identical.
Identical probability of winning. But the payouts and the psychological allure are vastly different. Usually, in any pairing of horses, one is the heavy favorite with low odds, and one is the underdog with high odds.
Right. Horse 1 is the champion stallion. Horse 2 is the 3-legged rescue horse that somehow made it to the track.
Exactly. Now, gamblers look at the payout boards. They see the exacta box, they think, wow, if the three-legged rescue horse somehow manages to cross the finish line first, ahead of the champion, the exacta payout for that specific 2-1 combination is going to be astronomical.
So they get greedy.
So they are drawn like moths to a flame to the exacta box. They want that potentially massive life-changing return.
Even though the exacta box costs twice as much to buy because you're buying 2 tickets, and the probability of the underdog actually taking first place is near zero.
Yes. They are paying double for a microscopic chance at a massive payout when the Quinella bet, which covers the exact same top 2 outcome, often yields a much better, more reliable return on investment over time, especially since the champion horse is vastly more likely to cross first anyway.
But they rationalize it. This is the crazy part. The gambler's brain starts doing gymnastics.
Oh, totally.
They think, well, if they're both fast enough to be in the top 2, maybe the champion drifts, maybe the jockey sneezes and the long shot edges him out by a nose. It could happen.
It's pure cognitive dissonance. The author watched these seasoned gamblers tie themselves into psychological knots. The gamblers knew, logically, that the champion lower odds horse was going to win.
But they couldn't help themselves.
Right. The psychological allure of the big, flashy return forced them to rationalize completely irrational bets. The author jokes that he paid a very high tuition losing money at the track, but he realized he wasn't paying to learn how to bet on horses.
What was he paying for?
He was paying tuition to study human psychology in the wild.
And what he learned is that human beings are not calculating machines. We don't operate on spreadsheets. We operate on hope, on fear, on the thrill of the long shot.
We really do.
We have deep emotional needs that completely override cold logic. And that observation leads directly into another incredible anecdote he shares. He leaves the racetrack and he witnesses this dynamic play out in the most mundane, frustrating environment on earth.
Oh, I know this one. An airport customer service desk.
Yes, the airport complaint story. This is a masterclass in applied psychology.
It really is.
Let me set the scene for you, the listener. Picture this. You're at a crowded airport gate. A young female airline clerk is standing behind the counter, and she is dealing with an absolutely furious male customer.
Just completely irate.
He's red in the face, veins popping, shouting about some boundary case issue with airline policy. He missed a connection or his bag is overweight, whatever it is. Technically, according to the rule book, he is not entitled to what he wants, but he feels deeply personally wronged by the airline.
It is a tense, volatile situation, the kind where security might need to get involved. Then, an older male boss, a supervisor, rushes over from the back office to intervene.
Now, if you are the angry customer and you suddenly see a second airline employee, a boss, stepping up to the counter, your adrenaline spikes. You feel ganged up on. It's 2 against 1.
A corporate shield wall is forming.
Exactly. The natural instinct of the supervisor is usually to defend their employee and defend the policy, which only pours gasoline on the fire. But the young clerk does something absolutely brilliant.
She de-escalates it in a very unique way.
She doesn't argue with the man. She doesn't quote the policy at him. And crucially, she doesn't let her boss take over and argue with him either.
Instead, she turns away from the customer entirely. She turns to her boss, and she perfectly meticulously explains the angry man's frustration. She takes on the customer's perspective 100%. She becomes his proxy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. She essentially says to her boss, this gentleman is extremely upset, and understandably so, because from his perspective, he followed all the rules, he arrived on time, and our policy failed him in this specific frustrating way.
She advocates for his anger.
Yes, she gave the angry man exactly what he actually wanted. And this is the secret of the story. The man didn't just want a refund or a meal voucher.
He wanted to be heard.
He wanted his righteous indignation validated by the system that wronged him. By having the clerk, the representative of the system, explain his anger to her superior perfectly, he experienced instant psychological catharsis.
I can just picture him standing there, his jaw dropping, nodding along, thinking, yes, exactly, finally, someone gets it.
And the moment she became his advocate, his anger just evaporated. The fight left his body. He was no longer fighting a faceless bureaucratic airline. He was watching an ally effectively translate his pain to management.
The author observed this from the seating area and realized it is the ultimate psychological de-escalation technique.
I want to pause on this because it connects so perfectly back to the corporate compliance failures we talked about earlier. In both cases, the boardroom and the airport, the solution requires an extreme amount of empathy.
Empathy is the missing variable in almost all failing systems.
Think about it. When the transit worker takes the cold medicine and fails the breathalyzer, the compliance department needs the empathy to step into his shoes, feel his panic about his pension, and say, "We understand you made a human error. We aren't going to ruin your life. Let's just get you off the road safely today."
They have to validate his humanity.
Right. And when the customer is screaming at the gate, the clerk needs the empathy to step into his shoes, feel his travel anxiety, and validate his frustration.
It's all about recognizing the irrational emotional reality of the human being in front of you, rather than demanding they act like a perfect rational robot.
But this raises a really disturbing question for me. If our choices are driven by these deep, sometimes totally irrational psychological needs, like throwing away money, chasing a long shot at the track, or needing to scream at a desk clerk because we feel powerless, or hiding a mistake out of pure panic, just how much control do we actually have over ourselves?
That is the pivotal philosophical question of this entire deep dive.
Right, because we like to think we are the captains of our own souls, but are we?
How much conscious control do we actually possess? And to answer that, the author moves from the external world, the rules, the airports, the casinos, into the internal physical world of our own bodies.
This is where the source material gets incredibly humbling. The author tells a story about sitting at home, watching a television program that featured an elite athlete, some kind of gymnast or martial artist.
Okay.
And this athlete made a very bold, arrogant claim on camera. He said, "Having high physical ability means being able to control your body perfectly. I know exactly where every part of my body is in space at all times."
Which is quite the claim.
Right. The athlete then challenged the viewers at home to a simple test. The mirror test. He said, "Stand in front of a mirror, close your eyes. Now, try to raise your arms out to your side so they are perfectly, exactly horizontal, like you are making a T shape. Get them perfectly level in your mind's eye. Then open your eyes and look in the mirror."
I have to confess, I literally put the source material down and tried this in my bathroom.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. You think, I'm a grown adult. Of course I know where horizontal is. I can feel it.
Did it work?
No. The author thought the exact same thing. He stands up, closes his eyes, raises his arms, feels perfectly balanced, and opens his eyes. And he is completely shocked.
He wasn't level.
He is tilted. One arm is pointing slightly up, the other is drooping down. He's a mess. He compares his reflection to a broken yajirobe.
For those who might not know, a yajirobe is a traditional Japanese balancing toy. It's usually a little wooden figure balancing on a point with two long, curved arms holding weights. It wobbles back and forth, but eventually finds a perfect horizontal balance.
But the author's personal yajirobe was completely crooked.
If we connect this mirror test to the bigger picture we've been discussing, the author has this profound, almost spiritual realization.
Let's hear it.
If we, as functioning adults, cannot even consciously control our own physical limbs to be perfectly horizontal when we are standing still in a quiet room trying our absolute hardest, how on earth can we expect to perfectly control our complex emotions?
We can't.
Exactly. How can we perfectly control our words when we are flooded with adrenaline in an argument? How can a massive corporation realistically expect its thousands of exhausted, stressed employees to perfectly adhere to a 50-page manual of strict corporate rules 100% of the time?
We are biologically, physically incapable of that level of perfection. We are asking for the impossible.
I want you, the listener, to really think about this in your own life. Think about a time recently when you snapped at your partner or yelled at your kid over something incredibly stupid. The instant the words left your mouth, you regretted it.
Yep, we've all been there.
Your conscious brain knew the rule. Don't say the mean thing, it will cause a fight. But your emotional system overrode the controls and broke the rule anyway. You failed the mirror test. We're all just wobbly balancing toys trying to stay upright.
And the philosophical takeaway the author offers here is incredibly beautiful. He suggests that acknowledging our inherent clumsiness, our lack of perfect control, is actually the first necessary step toward grace.
Grace for ourselves and others.
Exactly. It is our shared imperfection, our yajirobe nature, that creates the space for intimacy, forgiveness, and connection among humans.
Because if we were perfect, we would meet each other.
Exactly. If we were all perfect, calculating robots, reaching the realm of masters, there would be no forgiveness because there would be no mistakes. There would be no empathy because there would be no pain. Our flaws, our inability to hold our arms straight, are the gaps where human connection actually happens.
He relates this to a highly relatable, almost sitcom level domestic story too. The essay about the found socks.
Yes, the found socks. It's a perfect micro example of our lack of awareness. The author describes a frantic morning where he is tearing his bedroom apart, looking for a specific pair of socks he carefully laid out the night before.
Oh, I hate mornings like that.
He's stressed, he's searching the drawers, he's crawling on the floor, looking under the bed, getting more and more frustrated with himself and the universe. Finally, he stops, takes a breath, looks down at his feet, and realizes he is already wearing them.
No way.
He put them on absent-mindedly 10 minutes ago.
It's hilarious, and we've all done something exactly like it with our phone or our keys, but it's also a deep metaphor. We are constantly searching outward.
What do you mean?
We look outward for perfection. We look outward for the right rule, the perfect compliance system, the flawless outcome, when in reality, the messy, imperfect, oblivious truth is already right there attached to us.
We're looking outward when we should be looking inward and accepting the flawed reality that is already present. And this lack of conscious control, this inability to accurately perceive our own physical state, like not knowing you're wearing socks, extends beyond just our bodies.
Where else does it go?
It extends to the very fabric of how we experience reality. It dictates how our brains perceive time itself.
Which brings us to the final and maybe the most mind-bending section of the source material, the author's time series essays. We are moving from the physical limits of the body to the absolute illusions generated by the brain.
This stuff is fascinating.
Let's start with the universal human experience. Every adult listening to this has said this phrase, where did the year go?
Oh, constantly.
Why does time seem to radically speed up as we age? When I was 10 years old, summer vacation felt like an entire lifetime. I could live 1,000 lives between June and August. Now I blink and a whole year is gone.
It feels like a cruel joke of the universe, but it's actually a known psychological and mathematical phenomenon called Janet's Law, named after a French philosopher.
Janet's Law.
Yeah. It explains this acceleration based on the proportional mathematics of memory.
I was looking at the author's notes on this, and the math is incredibly simple but staggering when you think about it.
It is. Think about a 5-year-old child. For that child, one single year of life represents a massive 20% of their entire existence on Earth.
A fifth of their life.
Right. A fifth of everything they have ever known happens in those 365 days. It is a huge data-rich chunk of their lived reality. But when you are 50 years old, 1 year is only 2% of your life.
Wow.
As a fraction of your total experiential database, a year shrinks to almost nothing.
So because the denominator keeps getting bigger, the numerator, the present year, feels functionally smaller and faster. The brain just compresses it.
Exactly. The brain is highly efficient. It compresses routine, repeated past events to save cognitive space. If you drive the same route to work for 10 years, your brain stops recording the individual trips. It just blurs them into one drive to work file.
So when you look back, there is less novel data to stretch out the feeling of time.
But time isn't just a rigid mathematical formula. It stretches and compresses based on our expectations and emotions in the present moment, right?
Yes. And the author suggests a very practical strategy to combat this terrifying acceleration of aging. The brain processes time slowly when it is anticipating something novel. It allocates more cognitive resources to the unknown.
Okay, so how do we use that?
So the key to slowing down your subjective experience of life is to constantly place what the author calls small excitements in your future.
Like tripwires of novelty.
Precisely. If you always have something new to look forward to, booking a weekend trip to a new town, starting a pottery class, getting tickets to a concert for a band you've never seen, your brain has to slow down to anticipate and prepare for it.
You interrupt the compression algorithm of routine.
You stretch your subjective experience of time by feeding the brain novelty.
It's hacking your own perception. And speaking of hacking perception, the author brings up an auditory illusion that completely scrambled my brain. The concept that one silence is more.
This is one of the most fascinating psychological quirks in the essays.
Break it down for me.
In standard audio perception testing, scientists know that if you play one continuous unbroken tone for a subject, say, for exactly 5 seconds, the subject's brain perceives that tone as lasting much longer than if you played that exact same tone for the exact same 5 seconds, but broke it up with brief pauses.
Continuous stimulus feels heavier and longer.
Which makes sense for a noise. But the author says scientists found this exact same illusion applies to the complete absence of noise, to silence.
And that's where I get lost. How can silence, which is literally nothing, be an illusion?
Because to the human brain, silence is not nothing. The brain is an active prediction engine. If you sit a subject in a soundproof room and subject them to a continuous block of pure silence, The brain actually processes that absence of sound as a distinct active event.
It is listening to the silence.
Yes. As a result, a single, uninterrupted block of silence feels significantly longer, heavier, and more profound to the listener than silence that is occasionally interrupted by a random transient noise, like a cough or a chair scraping.
That is wild. The brain is actively constructing the experience of nothingness. It is building a reality out of empty space, and in doing so, it distorts our perception of how much time is passing.
The brain is doing an unbelievable amount of heavy lifting entirely behind the scenes without our conscious permission. And nowhere is that hyperfast autonomous processing speed more evident than in how the brain builds narratives while we sleep.
Oh, dreams.
Yes, the author uses dreams and the phenomenon of your life flashing before your eyes during an accident to prove just how fast the unconscious brain works.
We've all had those dreams, right? You wake up exhausted because you just lived through an epic James Bond level storyline. You traveled across shifting landscapes, you had deep emotional conversations with people from your past, you solved a mystery.
It felt like it took hours, maybe days, in dream time.
But neurologically, we know that the REM cycle where that dream occurred likely lasted only a few seconds, maybe a couple of minutes.
The processing speed is unfathomable.
It is a supercomputer. The unconscious brain takes completely random, meaningless fragments of data from your day, a billboard you glanced at on the highway, a snippet of a stranger's conversation you heard on the subway, the smell of a bakery you walked past.
And what does it do with them?
In a fraction of a second, it weaves them together into a hyper-fast, emotionally complex, fully realized narrative reality.
And here's where the author takes all of these seemingly disparate threads: the lack of conscious control, the extreme empathy required to handle human error, the illusion of time, and the brain's hyperspeed narrative building, and combines them into one deeply moving, almost science fiction level speculation about the end of life.
Yes, it is the emotional climax of the author's work. The author ponders this. If we know that the unconscious brain can build decades-long, emotionally rich dreams in a matter of physical seconds using external stimuli, what if we applied this knowledge to patients who are comatose or lying in a hospital bed in their final fleeting moments of life?
Normally, in those moments, families just stand by the bed. We hold their hand, we cry, the monitors beep, which is a completely natural human reaction to grief.
It is natural, but the author asks, instead of just grieving passively, what if we actively utilize the brain's narrative supercomputer? What if we intentionally provided the dying brain with beautiful, curated raw materials?
Like what kind of material?
What if, in those final minutes, we played their absolute favorite nostalgic music from their youth? What if we introduced the scent of the ocean if they loved the beach, or sprayed the specific perfume their spouse wore on their wedding day?
You're trying to seed the dream.
Exactly. You are feeding the supercomputer. If we feed the brain those comforting, deeply emotional stimuli, the author suggests we might be able to help the unconscious mind rewrite their final inner narrative.
To give them a better ending.
Yes. In the span of a few physical minutes on the hospital clock, their hyper-fast brain could spin a final dream state where they subjectively experience decades of joyous life, surrounded by love, resolving old regrets, and finding absolute peace before the end.
I want you to really sit with that for a second. What stands out to you there? Because for me, it's the profound comfort of the idea that even when we lose all physical control, when our yajirobe is completely broken and we are lying in a hospital bed, our brain, this magnificent organ, is still desperately trying to build a narrative to protect us and comfort us.
It is the ultimate act of empathy. It is taking everything we know about human psychology, the limits of our control, and the illusions of time, and using it to provide ultimate grace to a human being in their most vulnerable possible state.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and bring this entire journey full circle. We started today in a rigid, flowchart-filled corporate boardroom. We looked at the flawed, punitive logic of standard compliance.
And we saw how demanding perfection and punishing honest mistakes with draconian fury doesn't create safety.
No, it just forces good people to hide innocent errors, ultimately endangering the third party, the public, the exact thing compliance is supposed to protect.
Then we saw how indirect administrative departments build bloated, useless rules, the 30% paradox, because they don't understand the messy, frictional reality of the frontline worker.
Then we zoomed out and looked at the psychology of risk and irrationality. We watched gamblers tie themselves in knots, chasing the exacta-box long shot, because human beings are driven by emotion, hope, and the desperate need for catharsis.
Just like the angry customer screaming at the airport gate who just needed an empathetic clerk to validate his pain.
And ultimately, we drilled down into the physical and neurological limits of the human condition. We discovered that the root of all these systemic issues, the corporate failures, the angry outbursts, the casino losses, is a fundamental failure to accept human imperfection.
We aren't robots.
No. Whether it's a panicked bus driver terrified of a breathalyzer test, or our own sheer inability to hold our arms perfectly straight in the mirror with our eyes closed, we are beautifully, predictably, and biologically flawed.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your week. We've talked extensively today about how massive corporations create overly strict, punitive rules that force their employees to hide their honest mistakes. But look inward. What about the rules you create for yourself?
Oh, your own internal compliance department.
Exactly. Are your own internal standards of perfection so incredibly strict, so unforgiving, that you are forcing your own subconscious to hide your true feelings, your fears, and your honest mistakes from yourself?
That's a scary thought.
Are you punishing yourself so harshly for every minor error that you've stopped taking risks entirely?
That is heavy. Are you sweeping your own broken vase under the rug of your own mind because you were terrified of your own judgment? Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. I hope we gave you a new lens to view the systems around you and the system inside you. Take that final thought with you, and please try to give yourself and the wobbly balancing toys around you just a little more grace this week. We'll see you next time.